All right, let's get to this next story here. Headline, U.S. sees steepest decline of mothers of young children in the workforce in 40 years. This was shared by the University of Kansas on social media here in the last day or so. And I saw this story shared by KU. It's from CBS News. And I thought, that's great.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing.
I was wondering, I'm like, which way does this go? I'll bet it doesn't go the way I think it should go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is great news.
I thought maybe that's a good sign.
That's what I would think. So it goes on to share this story about, one woman in particular who said here, the average daycare we found was $500 a week. I made $1,000 every 2 weeks. So with 2 kids, I was like, this just doesn't make sense. It would basically cancel out my check. They decided that they could live off of her husband's income. He is a plumber. So she said goodbye to a job that she once loved. Here's the national trend. More than 400,000 women left the U.S. workforce in the first half of 2025, according to a University of Kansas analysis of the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. It's the steepest decline in more than 40 years for mothers of young children. Economist Misty Hegenes found that childcare was the main reason young mothers were leaving their jobs. So the story goes on to basically bemoan the cost of childcare. But I'm here to suggest this is, in a backhanded way, actually a great thing for everybody. Yeah, the childcare costs are out of control. But at the same time, if this means that mothers can be home with their young kids during their early years of life in particular, for large swaths of their day, instead of putting them into a daycare, that's awesome. That's how it was intended to be. And I realize that may not be able to be the case for everybody. I understand and I'm well aware of some of those limitations. But to frame this as, boy, this is a real tragedy for the workforce, how about once again, like the school story, how about we think about what this is about for the kids first? How about we think about what this means for society first? Not about what it means for some Fortune 500 company. Not about what it means for the stock price of some company that just churns and burns through people and will blow you out the minute that they have to make some cuts and won't care one bit about what your daycare bills are. How about we look at it from that perspective? Maybe it's also many young mothers waking up to the realization that if they have to pay for daycare and it takes a large chunk of their salary, then what are they actually working for? Like if you do the math on what the daycare is versus what you make, and you suddenly are like, wait, okay, so I'm making X amount of dollars a year. I'm making, just pick a number, 50, 60, 70 grand, whatever. But 25, 30 of it is going to daycare for a couple of kids. And then I got my taxes I got to pay on that 50, 60, 70 grand. What do I have left? What am I working for? 15, 20, 25, $30,000 a year? I'm making somebody else potentially a lot of money to be away from my kid, and I'm spending all this money on daycare to boot as well? So instead of looking at it and saying, oh, boy, what a shame this is. Women are leaving the workforce. And, oh, boy, that's just, oh, gosh, we got to figure out what to do about these daycare costs. I mean, I'm not saying we don't need to do that as well, although I don't think the answer is government getting involved. There is actually a net positive here. If 400,000 women left the workforce in the first half of the year, well, guess what? That's at least 400,000 kids who get more time with their mother. And that is something to celebrate, not something to bemoan. 913-408-7957. That's how you join us on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. Let's hear from the moms. If you're someone who has left the workforce recently, if this describes you, I'd love to hear your why at 913-408-7957. Or if it's even a conversation you're having right now with yourself. Maybe you're driving to the office and you're thinking, gosh dang, I want that to be me. Or maybe it's not you. I don't, whatever. 913-408-7957. is how you join us on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. The University of Kansas shared the story on its Facebook page here. KU study shows that more than 400,000 women left the workforce in the first half of 2025, the steepest decline of working mothers of young children in 40 years. Now, KU in the CBS News story goes on to basically bemoan the fact and say, well, child care costs are too high. I'm looking at it and I'm saying this is great news. 400,000 kids, at least 400,000 kids. I mean, it could be more if you got 2 kids at home, are now around their mothers more frequently at a critical age and time that you will never get back. 913-408-7957. Chrissy is in Kansas City first up. Hi, Chrissy. Good morning.
Good morning. So years ago, I had 2 small children, and I worked for a large bank. They had an on-site daycare across the parking lot, and so they offered what they considered subsidized childcare. And the cost of the childcare was about 65% of my income. And my husband worked, so then we're maintaining 2 vehicles to drive to 2 separate jobs to essentially pay for the cars to get me to work, the daycare, and it made 0 cents, so I stayed home. I agree 1,000% that this is a wonderful opportunity for children and for women to be with their children, but there are a lot of things that we miss out on when we do that, especially as a mother, you don't receive a pension or retirement, you don't receive health benefits. There is a lot of things that when we re-enter the workforce that are not valued. So I go home and I maintain a budget for the house, and I maintain the schedules of 4 to 6 people. That does not have a value for you going back into the workforce. And that is a real struggle. Also, you tend to lose yourself, which I did. There's not a lot of organizations that serve mothers that are home with their children. I think I attended a MOPS program, which was great. That helped. But those are types of things that they need to have available to mothers that do that organizations should focus on. If we really think that this is important, we also have to value their time that they spent with their children and those jobs that they did in their home, because we don't do that currently. I would also say that as I now have children that are in their late 20s, and I still had surprise late in life children with my husband, that we do tend to think that it's very important to be home with our very young children. You don't know if the daycare is pinching them or whatever's going on, and the cost is outrageous. But as I've raised my children, I want to let parents know it's very important for you to also be there for your children at middle school and high school. There are things that are influencing them and experiences that they're having in life where they really need you. So this whole idea that you're just I had this idea I would flourish. My kids would, become 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th graders, and I would gradually re-enter the workforce, which I did. But I did that and learned that it is still important to have that balance where you have parents that are there for your children when they are at an age when those decisions and those issues that are presented to your children are much more significant than they are generally when they're 2 or 3 years old.
Chrissy, thank you very much for sharing your story. I appreciate it. That is, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, the parenting doesn't end. If anything, it might actually get harder in some ways, right? Versus when they're toddlers and screaming and yelling at you. And it might be worse when they're 13.
Computer updates. There's 1.0, 2.0.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. But you are right. I mean, this is, what I say to Kate all the time. And we're fortunate to be in a situation where, sure, we'd love more technically. Who wouldn't? But we've made that decision to have her home. I said, what you're doing, you can't put a price tag on. You just can't. And, it's difficult about it. And I understand this because I see it. When you're raising, especially little kids, you don't see those day-to-day wins that you might get going to a job. You close a big client. For us, you get a great month of ratings, and you can actually tangibly tie yourself to some level of success. You don't get that day-to-day with little kids, and I get it. And if you're someone who has been very successful in the workforce, my wife has had that prior to having children. I know many women listening right now have had that or are having that. You don't get that day-to-day gratification necessarily. And that's hard to duplicate. But the big picture, gosh, is it so worth it? Lydia's in Liberty. Go ahead, Lydia.
Yeah, hey, I want to echo the sentiments to that last caller as well. But I'll tell you, too, I've done both. So I didn't want to go back into the workforce when we had our daughter, but I did. And a part of me is like, I can't be at home with my kid all the time. I know it sounds horrible, but I just felt like I was losing myself. But now that I'm older and my kids are both older, I've got a senior in high school and now a 22-year-old. My daughter that was an infant is now 22. Crazy to think. I now find myself as an older mom wanting to be home with my kiddos because they need you. They need you just as much in middle school. If not, I would argue more so because you're molding them. I want to disciple to my children. I want to see them to become wonderful Christ followers, and not being home, I didn't feel like allowed me to do that. But now I'm running my own businesses and I'm able to be home. And when I was a labor and delivery nurse, my patients would come in and be like, oh, I'm just a stay-at-home mom. I'm like, no, you're a home engineer. You're getting to have such an impression on your home, and it wouldn't function the way it does without you. And we needed to quit devaluing ourselves as stay-at-home moms.
You're right.
We need to embrace it and love it.
That word "just" has got to be removed from the conversation. Yes. And the home engineer is fantastic. Fantastic. I love that, Lydia. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. God bless.
You as well. That's tremendous. Home engineer. There you go. Put that on the resume. And you tell those corporate America folks, those Fortune 500 companies, if you get back into the workforce, put that in their pipe and smoke it. See if they can do it for 20 years. Melissa and Shawnee, go ahead.
Hi. I wanted to say, first off, that I completely agree with you on all of your points so far, but what hasn't been mentioned that I've heard anyways is that I would argue that most kids being in daycare now is kind of led to where we're at now with kids being confused because they don't have the constant, influence from their parents and getting pushed in the direction of their parents' values because the parents have to be at work all the time. I personally had 6 kids, and I stayed home when they were all young, and I would not trade that for the world. I think that's the way that it was meant to be. The moms are supposed to take care of the kids just like my mom did with us.
Yeah, 6 children. Jeez, you need a medal there, Melissa. Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you. And you're right. I could not agree with you more as well when it comes to what is natural. It's not a knock on anyone who works at a daycare or anything like that, but it's what it was always intended to be. And by the way, I'll say this as well. People talk about daycare costs. Well, why do 2 people need to work now more so than ever? Because we've devalued the dollar. Inflation has ruined our ability to oftentimes live on a single family or single parent income. And, it used to be, I remember, in the old days, you had the guys would work a couple of jobs. Too many guys don't want to do that anymore either. They don't want to work a side gig. They don't want to work a second job. That's been happening forever. Bring some of that back as well. Bring that into the conversation. But when the government devalues your currency and creates massive inflation to the point where you feel like both people have to work to just keep your head above water, what does that say about the system that we've got?